And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with a first edition of UFO News Network Sunday for the year 2020. So we're all set to go. Let me bring in my co-host, Chant Hanna, to introduce our special guest for the show today.
Oh, hi, Frank. Thank you so much for introducing me. We have a very special guest I have had the privilege and honor of interviewing before. It was last year at the Phoenix Lights event that Dr. Linkatai holds annually in Phoenix, Arizona. And that is Jonathan Dover, a veteran law enforcement officer. He worked for the City of Winslow, Arizona Police Department, the National Park Service, the Navajo Historic Preservation Department, and the Navajo Nation Rangers. He retired from active duty as a lieutenant in 2011 and worked for 31 years as a law enforcement officer. He was an archaeological resource crimes investigator. He was also trained in criminal investigations as an emergency medical technician, in special weapons and tactic operations, hazardous materials, search and rescue, which included training in high-angle technical rescue, and was an instructor in police firearms. During his work on Navajo lands, he, along with Stanley Milford Jr., were assigned over a period of 10 years to officially investigate and document significant cases involving the following topics of Bigfoot, Navajo witchcraft, the paranormal and UFOs, skinwalkers, and ghosts. This was the special projects area that Dover and Milford managed regarding cases that are deemed critical, sensitive, or high profile in nature, ranging from priority investigations to dignitary protection and high risk detail to emergency operations. Welcome, John, to our show.
Thank you very much.
Before we embark upon the interview, I wanted to give a little bit of background information that you have already shared publicly at various UFO conferences around the United States. And that way our listeners are familiar with a little bit regarding what you do and where you have done your investigations. And that is the Navajo Nation covers 27,000 square miles. That's the size of West Virginia. So 17 million acres is what you travel through regarding areas you're assigned to, from Flagstaff, Arizona to Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is 4 hours of traveling, if all the roads are in good condition, of which they are not. The largest portion of the reservation is in Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. The Navajo Nation is the largest Native American reservation in the U.S. An older statistic reveals that the Navajo Nation's population was confirmed at nearly 360,000. The Navajo Nation is comprised of around 110 chapters, which are the center of the local community government. The Navajo Nation has its own president and VP with 24 council members. Is that correct, John?
That's correct.
Okay, great. The first question I have for you is, growing up on the Navajo Nations, as a child, before you entered law enforcement, did you see anything or witness anything of the topics you investigated later on?
Well, growing up, we spent our summers on the Navajo Reservation. And during that time, we did have one incident where we saw a red orb that was pretty much drifting through the trees. It crossed this is about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we're already getting on the road because it takes us an hour to get down off of the Carrizo Mountains. And as we're driving out, my grandfather and grandmother were sitting up front. I was sitting up front between them. I was probably junior high age, and this red light is just going through the trees, weaving back and forth. And my grandfather wanted to grab his 30-30 rifle and shoot it. My grandmother kept telling him, "Don't you dare," and she was saying that was a skinwalker. And at the time, I had no idea what it was. It was just weird. You could see the red light shining on the ground, and it went up the hill, weaving back and forth through the trees. Now, where it went up the hill, I'd done a lot of sheep herding up in there, and I know that there's no roads, there's no trails, nothing to go on there, and so that was kind of I guess, a glimpse into what I would, find out about later.
Skinwalkers is a topic that goes back hundreds of years, I'm guessing, regarding Native American lore and also just communicating that topic throughout the generations. Um, I wanted to know, when was the first time you heard of that topic? Did your family share that topic with you? And how far does it go back within the Native American culture?
That topic actually goes back even, I would say back to the 1700s. Um, it's always been known about. Nobody talks about it. Me and Stan are not the experts within this field. We're just the only two that would talk about it. And I have to be very careful as to what I talk about. In one case, we finished speaking about that subject. The very next weekend, we had 9 near intersection or head-on collisions involving both our families, which is a real unusual activity that would take place. So it's actually pretty dangerous. You could actually be killed just talking about this subject.
Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you know the next question I had, but I'm not going to ask you to answer it, okay? Because it was related to that topic, but I'm going to share it with you anyway, even though we don't need to talk about it. So the next question I was going to ask you is, you stated Utah was part of your territory regarding the investigations that you managed with Milford Jr. Bigelow, as we know, had a research project going on at Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. Did his project at Skinwalker Ranch ever intersect with your research of the Skinwalker phenomena? Was what I was about to ask you, but we can move on to other topics.
Actually, it did. We were conducting an investigation at a place called Satan's Butte, and that had a lot of similarities to what they were experiencing at Skinwalker Ranch. And what we thought was interesting is that both of those locations are on the exact same longitude. So there is a geographic connection with that too.
Understood. And just one small thing, you cut out right when you said it was called Satan's. What was that?
Satan's Butte.
Oh, got it. Okay. By the way, did you ever go near Elephant Butte at all, or go across that area?
There's a place called Elephant's Feet that's north of Tuba City. I've been pretty much all over the Navajo reservation doing investigations, so I've had a chance to see quite a bit of it.
Okay, I was just asking because there was a famous case of a serial killer who was on the top 10 list of sadistic serial killers of all time, and he was residing in Elephant Butte, which is in New Mexico, as you know, and his name was David Parker Ray. I was just curious if you ever came across anything at Elephant Butte that was interesting to you.
No, not in that area, no.
Got it. Okay. Wanted to ask you, what are the percentage of cases that were resolved between yourself and Milford, or just yourself, regarding the special cases? Was there a high percentage or low, or are they still open? What's the status of them?
Well, a lot of those cases were what we call administratively closed. We're talking over a period of 10 years. And these are kind of like the major cases. Other rangers handle the lesser cases. So they were all being investigated. But for the major cases, I would say that there were probably about 80.
Okay. And what?
Okay, percentage-wise,
Yeah.
there wasn't a whole lot of them that were solved. We did manage to solve one that I can actually relate, and in this case, we had a woman who was she had come back from family out in San Francisco and California, and she moved back because she inherited some land. And that land had a hogan on it, and she's living on a border town. So it's right on the reservation line before you get to the town. Um, she started experiencing bundles left on her area there. The hogan itself had broken windows, no door on it. The roof was needing repair, and after she moved back, she started seeing what she called skinwalker activity. Um, she contacted the state police, the county, the city, um, even the Navajo police. Nobody wanted to take her case. And we went out there and did the investigation, and me and Stan started tracking that area. As we tracked it, we observed that there were at least 6 individuals that were walking around on the trail behind her place. So what we ended up determining was that these guys were actually a bunch of transients that had been using her hogan as a place to stay during the wintertime or inclement weather. And they would go to town, excuse me, they would go to town and they would buy their alcohol and go back there and drink it. And they'd have a nice place to, even with no windows and door, it was a place to sleep and get in out of the weather. So after we told her this, we told her somebody's mimicking what you would see. And we didn't hear anything more from her after that. A couple of months later, she called our department and she was in tears. And she told us that nobody else would listen to me. Everybody just, cast me off. And because you guys came out there and did the investigation and found out that it was a fraud, then because of that, she says, my house is fixed up and I'm not having any visitations anymore. And she just wanted to call it an Anchus.
I see. So regarding all the cases you and Stan had in their totality, would you say that aside from prosaic, ordinary explanations, that there was a high percentage or a certain percentage of an unknown natural phenomenon or a familiar phenomenon or device or an unfamiliar phenomenon?
Well, in a lot of our cases, we close them administratively, but they remain open with no explanation. Um, we've had a lot of UFO cases. Those cases, a lot of them are just flyovers or flybys, is what we classify them as. A bunch of people see lights in the sky, they take photographs, they have some type of documentary evidence. But other than that, there's really nothing. We've seen unknown craft on our own, and on numerous occasions, and we have no explanation for them.
Tell us a little bit more about that, John, the unknown craft that you saw yourself.
Well, I've seen a cigar-shaped craft that was probably about maybe 200 yards long, flying very, very low, maybe about 100 feet over the landscape in the middle of the night. This thing had one almost like a spotlight, but it was a collimated beam is what I would call it, almost like a laser, where it was shining down white, but it didn't diffuse. As it was flying, it had a really heavy engine sound, just like an engine that's really, like you would think of with a train engine or a ship engine. We've seen discs, we've seen orbs. I've had one follow me for about 40 minutes while I was on the highway. It was a green orb that followed me between Indian Wells all the way to past State Route 87 junction and Route 15. And that one was following behind my vehicle for about half of the way, and then veered off over the landscape, over the fencing, and started going along the mesa tops. And it turned from green to red, and really gave me an uneasy feeling that time. This was about 2 o'clock in the morning, coming back from a Bigfoot investigation.
Now, did you follow up on that to see if it was some kind of unknown or experimental aircraft or anything like that, or did you just kind of let it go?
I just kind of let it go. This thing, it couldn't have been an experimental aircraft because it was maybe about 4 feet off the ground following me. You could see the green light underneath it, and it was totally silent. And when it went off of the road, out across the landscape, it again, there's no roads where it went. It just made a straight line to where the mesas are. So that one was very strange. Of course, the night before, the Phoenix lights, me and my family saw a bunch of lights circling Loop, and these were about seven lights that were circling in a counterclockwise direction around our community. They were seen from Cameron, from Tuba City, from Coal Mine Mesa, from the Hopi villages, all the way around to Delcon, and even down toward Winslow.
Okay, and for the folks, we've got listeners all around the world might not be familiar with the geography there. Where do these things take place relative to Phoenix?
Okay,
are you north or?
These are all in northern Arizona. This is from Flagstaff, Arizona. These are all northeast of there, about 50 miles, and all those areas are about 50 to 70 miles away from, I'd say about 50 miles away from Loop, where I live. And we watched these things circling for about 30 to 40 minutes. It was a whole community thing. I mean, people were actually turning out the lights of their houses, bringing lawn chairs out and sitting there, talking about these things flying around us. And we thought that the video cameras, the press, everybody else was going to be up there just flooding our community the very next day. And the very next day, the Phoenix lights took place and just kind of totally eclipsed all the information of what we saw up there.
Did you get any video or photographs or anything like that of what your folks saw up there?
Yeah, I actually had a video camera on a tripod, I videotaped it for as long as I could. And at the end of that, 2 weeks later, a guy named Greg showed up from, he said he was from Grants, New Mexico. And he asked me if he could have the videotape to do a scientific analysis. He disappeared, law enforcement officer, you're trying to be helpful. And I said, sure, and he disappeared with the tape and I never saw it again. I did have a copy of it, and that copy has since disappeared or been destroyed. So can't really go back there. I did call into the county sheriff's department that night and asked them if they had anybody on the north end from Flagstaff that could verify something that I was seeing. And the dispatcher says, no, we don't have any officers. What's your traffic? And I just, at that time, we weren't investigating these things. These things were happening all the time. So I just said, never mind. And
now, I'm guessing that this is a more rural area, and up that way, the law enforcement is generally a sheriff's department, but a lot of these towns are small enough they don't have their own police departments. Is that about right?
That's right. The Navajo Reservation has approximately 400 police officers in 7 police districts across, that land. The Navajo Rangers, at the time, we had 15. So we were basically uniformed criminal investigators. The county does not really have officers stationed to respond up on the reservation unless it involves an Anglo that a crime's been committed against. So there's what they call concurrent jurisdiction, but for the most part, we don't see too much of county.
Well, that's a pretty good-sized crew, 400. I know near where I live in suburban Philadelphia, you might have a force of, 75 or 80 police officers for a town of maybe, a good-sized township like 50,000 people. So what's the population that those 400 officers cover?
The 400 officers from Navajo Police cover the entire Navajo Nation, 27,000 square miles. So there's 7 major cities on the reservation, and that's where those officers are based out of. Like I said, for the Rangers, we only had 15. So we were very, very small, and we just looked at it as job security.
Oh, go ahead, Chant.
Okay, yes. What I wanted to actually ask was, it appears as though the UFO phenomenon can materialize and dematerialize, and it's as if it's involved in possibly other realities or dimensions that coexist along with our own. So, wanted to know, what is your hypothesis regarding the UFO phenomenon? What is it?
Well, in 2012, we spoke at the International UFO Congress down in near Phoenix, and during that time, we hypothesized that a lot of these cases, in our estimation, were related to string theory, the idea of other dimensions, either parallel dimensions that were coexisting with ours, that these dimensions could be an infinite number. There could be 10 or 12. Nobody really knows. And at the time, We were the probably the only ones that were speaking about this subject, and we brought in. We were able to link up the idea of hauntings and ghosts, uh, the idea of the skinwalker traveling at incredible speeds and being able to run as fast as vehicles could drive, and the idea that Bigfoot would suddenly appear and then disappear. We've tracked him both directions. We've tracked him from where he came to where he went and stopped. And in both cases, when we're tracking the footprints, um, the tracks would just appear in trackable ground, and they would disappear also in trackable ground and would never reappear anymore. So we hypothesized that he was popping in to our reality from somewhere else. At the same time, this is really not a new theory. The Navajos themselves believe that they came in their creation story, along with many other Indian tribes, that they came from somewhere else. And they, in the case of the Navajos, they came through several different worlds: a world of darkness, an aquatic world, a world of insects and giants, and coming out into this world, which they said that they climbed through a hole from one place to the other by a reed, and managed to get all the people into the what they call the shining world now. So we started looking at all this, and it's the only real thing that explains how UFOs can suddenly seem to pop into our plane of existence and then just either disappear or fade out, and you can't see them anymore.
Right. So, despite worldwide radar systems and Earth orbiting satellites, UFOs, the UFO phenomenon, appears to leave little to no evidence.
Well, the UFO phenomenon does leave radar evidence when they're here.
Right.
They can be tracked.
But despite radar equipment, we don't always catch it, I guess is my point.
Right. They during the when was it? The 1970s. The government actually had a program based out of Colorado where they were actually scrambling fighter jets. And there's a very interesting book called "Shoot Them Down." I don't remember who it was written by, but
Frank Facino. I think is his last name.
But the book details how they were flying these missions in an attempt to shoot these UFOs down. And sometime later on, the pilots became basically basket cases and had to be taken off of flight status because they were so overwhelmed by this. We saw the same thing in the Phoenix Lights case. Two F-16 Eagles were scrambled. When they got back, one of the pilots literally had to be picked up and pulled out of his airplane because he was in such a deep state of shock. Somebody made a phone call and said they're going to lock the base down and order us not to talk about it, so I'm going to make this call now. So but there were two planes that were scrambled and encountered this object at 10,000 feet, or as in military parlance, Angels 10.
Okay, and just to let our listeners know which book John was referencing, and Frank actually said the name of the author of the book, but I don't think anybody heard. And that is, the title is Shoot Them Down, just as John said. The rest of the title is The Flying Saucer Air Wars of 1952, which was written by Frank C. Fascino Jr., which is Fescino Chino Jr., and the foreword was written by nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman. Was going to ask you, John, the problem, one possible problem with imagining things about the UFO phenomenon are the astronomical distances these crafts may have to traverse in order to get to us. So, are they living here on planet Earth and that's why they're always here? Or do you think they're going interstellar or they're going long distances to make it to our planet? What's going on?
We think that they're pan-dimensional beings, that they exist in a different dimension that coexists with our own. We don't see them because they actually exist at a different frequency than we do. And there's a lot of information out there as far as frequencies being used, such as the Philadelphia experiment that was using sound generators or electrical generators to change frequency. Um, so there's a lot of research still being done. They're using frequencies for riot control that are available to police departments that'll make you sick. And as we know, there are these attacks of U.S. Embassy personnel using different types of frequencies that's causing brain damage.
Okay, so I understood and I heard what you said, but do you think some of this topic has to do with time travel at all?
It could,
Whether whether
you
it be
know,
the past or the future?
it could very well be. Um, we like to think that we're the smartest kids on the block because we have digital watches, and we really aren't. Um, just because we don't have time travel doesn't mean that other places or civilizations already have it. And if you really think about it, 100 years ago we didn't believe man could fly, and then or over 100 years ago, and then here come the Wright brothers with their aircraft. So it was just shortly after that we had aircraft and we're flying around, and what's the first thing we did with it? We strapped guns to it and shot each other down in World War I. I really think that we have a long way to go as a species, that we're way, way too violent. And, our idea of politics is to kill and, therefore win. My own people, on both the Plains tribes and the Navajos, were subjected to a period of literal genocide where they tried to destroy us as a people, and yet we survived. So, I don't think we're in a position to learn about time travel or any of this thing. I think aliens would probably love to give us all this stuff, but we would be very irresponsible with it.
Right. It would be like pearls before swine. So I have one question to ask you and then another one right after that.
Sure.
But the question I have is, let me go ahead and preface my question with this statement. NASA considers the study of, I think, the ET topic to be irrelevant because of the number of possible false leads that study or research on it would provide, and the limited amount of usable scientific data that it could not yield. So why do you think the U.S. government, felt like yourself and Stan Milford Jr. could yield anything of any value regarding the topics that you all had to research?
Well, we know that there's a lot of curiosity by the government. Um, during several investigations, we had overflights of black helicopters that were unmarked that flew over the areas where we had active cases take place. We had military
John, you're breaking up a little bit there. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
personnel that were clearly out of place, and we've trained with a lot of Green Berets, to force people, Navy SEALs, PJs, just all different kinds of special forces operators, and in weapon schools. And so we know the type, we know what they look like, how they act, how they dress, even our Secret Service people. And we saw quite a few of those come onto the reservation and stay there for a while.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm sorry to interject, John, but when I had the privilege of interviewing you very briefly at the Phoenix Lights event that Dr. Lynn Katai held in Phoenix, Arizona last year, you were talking about this topic, and it is so fascinating. Can you just share a little bit more information about how there were government personnel from various capacities, different job titles, actually going on to the reservation to study the very topics you and Stan were assigned to research?
Well, first off, we weren't really researching it per se. We were investigating it because we had a victim, somebody that said, "Hey, this is happening. Can you help me?" And we had some people that were very, very frightened, especially when it came to Bigfoot cases. And so part of our job was to go and conduct a professional investigation and let them know that somebody cared enough about them to come out there, especially when it's a grandma and a grandpa. But yeah, we had quite a bit. In fact, after one of our major cases involving a UFO landing, and an occupant sighting, we actually had the marquee on the local hotel there in Window Rock that said, "Welcome, NASA scientists." We contacted MUFON, who contacted some people they know, and we found out that there was no NASA scientist convention on the reservation. And the very next day, that marquee was taken down. So we know that there was a lot of interest. We even had government type, military type officials showing up at our talks, at the different conventions. And we got to the point where they would come in after we started, would sit down with a clipboard and be taking notes, and then they would get up before we finished and walk out. And so we started giving them a shout out to any military personnel that were there to take notes on us. Just our way of acknowledging that this was going on.
Right. That was your nod to them. What it was also going to ask you, wouldn't it be true to say that you saw possibly Green Beret, or if you want to use the term Men in Black or whatever terms you might use, to describe some of the government personnel that were out on the reservation with binoculars or various types of equipment to actually try and capture or study the things that you and Stan Milford investigated? Is that correct?
Well, we actually did work a couple of different cases directly with Bigelow Aerospace Research investigators. And they told us that Bob Bigelow at the time was involved in aerospace. He was building the habitat modules for the space station that were made out of Kevlar for micrometeorite strikes. And they would fold these things up and take them up to the space station, attach them, and then air them up, and they'd air up just like a balloon. And so he has quite a big complex down in Las Vegas, and he had hired ex-special operators to do his investigations for him. As we know later on, much of that 22 to 24 million dollars that was put into the aerial threat identification program that the U.S. government ran for about 6 years. A lot of that went to Bigelow Aerospace Research.
Okay, yeah, we actually had the privilege of interviewing John Alexander, who headed the project for Bigelow at Skinwalker Ranch, which anyway, you know about that project very well. Wanted to move on to something else and ask you. I have two strange questions to ask you. Let me go ahead and let me start with the easier one. There's an individual I spoke to recently who is very high up in a UFO organization who we're going to have on our show here pretty soon, but I can't name him yet. He told me that he felt the ghost phenomenon, the paranormal phenomenon related to just ghost and poltergeist activity is a result of technology by extraterrestrials to throw off humans so they do not know about their presence or if they're being abducted. What is your input or reaction to that hypothesis?
Okay, our thoughts about the haunting phenomenons, and we have investigated these type of cases. Um, they're very, very strange. They tend to occur mainly around 3 to 3:10 a.m. in the morning. we we believe that, and this is just our opinion. So there's not a whole lot of scientific data backing it up, but our opinion is that these spectral um, apparitions, I guess, is what you would call them. In our thinking, when all of us are composed of energy of some kind, and when we die, that energy goes somewhere. Those electrical impulses, everything that makes us us, goes somewhere. And what we've seen is that these energies can attach themselves to objects or geologic things like rocks, and continue to reside there in some way. The things that we're seeing, we had one building that was built back in the 1920s, and there was a lot of activity taking place at this place. We saw the like laptop batteries flying across the room, smacking into the opposite wall, chairs moving by themselves. People would hear screams. People would be called on the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning with the calls originating from that office. And during that time when Stan was doing the investigation, he had 64 coins, nickels, dimes, quarters, pennies, over a 2-night period, fall from thin air, come flying across the room, actually hit people, bounce, roll, spin, and land. When they first started appearing, he called me and he says, "What I do?" And I says, "Well, you're an investigator. You have to photograph each one of them, measure from 2 walls, where it landed, document everything, and collect them." At the end of the process, we found out that every single one of these coins, even though they bounced, rolled, and spun, all landed heads up. In our estimation, a statistical impossibility. That phenomenon has continued since then, around around Stan, and when I'm with him, it happens to.
You're breaking up.
So it's kind of followed us.
You're breaking up a little bit. I did hear that last part. What was the statistical improbability of the heads falling on heads the whole time regarding the coins?
That 64 coins would land heads up.
What was the number for the statistical improbability of it?
Well, no, the 64 coins landing heads up is a statistical.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah, it should be
impossible.
roughly 32, 32.
Right. Okay. So moving on, there was a question I had to ask you that I've kind of been burning to ask you, and that is, so I'm going to share a little bit of history, and then I'll ask you the question. The history is that on November 27th, 1978, a Lieutenant Colonel Larry Coyne, along with J. Allen Hynek, addressed the UN committee for a proposal to appoint an expert group to study the nature and origin of UFOs. And this was basically the country of Grenada proposed that the Secretary General appoint a group of experts to the UN regarding the peaceful uses of outer space, define the guidelines for the UN study of the nature and origins of UFOs and related phenomena. And that resolution, the proposal of it was shot down. My question to you is, isn't it time? I know it's a leading question, but don't you think it's high time that somebody makes another proposal to the UN for the study and nature of the UFO phenomenon? You know, a crack team of specialists from all different backgrounds to study it?
I think that actually needs to be done. What they'll do, though, is they'll form a committee. And as you know, and I know, that when you form a committee, nothing will ever get done. And so I think it's going to get trapped forever in bureaucracy, because thinking about it, we would want to militarize. I mean, we have a United States Space Force now. We want to militarize space. And the first one to do that is going to have a huge advantage. So, this is the direction we're heading. I don't think there's going to be peace anywhere, and maybe this is why the aliens don't have contact with us, because we are this violent species that they know about, and they study us and say, okay, kids, this is what you don't want to be,
Okay. Just wanted to bring up something to your attention here, and you may have already heard about this, but in Taos, a close encounter happened regarding Josh Brinkley and Daniel Lucero, who were two hunters, and that happened late last year. And these two said that they were setting up, I guess they were hunting, and along a certain tree line on different sides of a field, as they sat and waited while they wanted to hunt, they saw a very strange scene. One of them actually saw, I guess, a table that was set out and a tent. Do you ever hear of people talking about, because we've interviewed Melinda Leslie, and she's talked about the military-industrial complex being involved, along with ETs, regarding tents being set up and tables being put out to study humans. Now, whether the veracity of her claims are good or not, I wanted to know whether you've heard about that phenomenon. Tents being set up, tables being set out by ETs.
I have heard very little about that. I know the abduction phenomenon is real, and we don't know why. The EBEs, ET, whatever you want to call them, are here. a lot of this is comparable to what happened when the Native Americans first encountered uh, uh, Anglos from another shore. They all came for different reasons, some to postulate and bring Christianity, some to uh, collect tobacco, some for potash, some for mass timbers, some for gold. So you have all these different nationalities coming to the Americas, looking for a whole lot of different stuff, and we could be seeing the same thing with the alien, whether he's coming from a different dimension, a different time, or a different interstellar coordinate. That each one may be here for a different reason.
Okay, well, I'm gonna read a quote by one of these hunters, and then I was gonna ask you a question about it.
Okay.
They said that, by the way, just so you know, they actually both work on movie sets, and as you know, in New Mexico, we had Breaking Bad for, we've had a lot of movies and TV series in New Mexico. And these guys who actually work in that industry, so they had seen movie sets before. And they said that they first thought it was a movie base camp. And they said it's this big tent structure, like a circus tent, 50 to 60 feet tall. Coming off the left of it was this long building, almost like what you would build for an archery lane for target practice. It was a third of the height, but really long, maybe a couple 100 feet. They were about a quarter of a mile away. They could not see the bottom of the structure. They were in the mountains. And one of them asked the other, is this a base camp for a movie? Are they building an alien ship set? And then when they continued up the hill, they said within just a few seconds, the whole thing was gone. So I was going to ask you, because we keep talking about how intangible the UFO phenomenon is, can ETs really blink things in and out of existence, no matter how complex the structure is that they have outside of their craft?
It would seem so. It would depend on the strength of the field that they're using. I know that in a lot of UFO sightings we've had, the ships are always described as being a little bit on the blurry side, like there's some kind of a field around the ship. And, it's anything's possible. We just need to open our minds to the fact that there's some unusual stuff going on. And our government, if they're not involved with it, can't do anything about it.
Before we wind down this interview, because we're coming near the end of it, I wanted to ask you, do you believe anyone or anything regarding an organization, any government, an entity, a group, or individual is in possession of any exotic alloys, metamaterials, or UAP fragments of any kind?
Oh, I strongly believe that. Yeah, there's things out there we have no idea about. And you hear a lot of people talking. I've handled some of that material that supposedly came from the plains of San Augustine, or the what is commonly known as the Roswell UFO crash site at the Brazil Ranch in New Mexico. These were collected much later. Boy, yeah, I think we have a lot of that material already.
Okay, and then one of my last questions to you, I just have two questions left, is did the December 16th, 2017 New York Times article titled Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program by Cooper Blumenthal and Leslie Kean mean anything to you? Did it have an impact on you? Do you believe it was a form of soft disclosure by the U.S. government claiming that there was an official UFO project, a government project allowed to study the UFO phenomena for 5 years. I believe, by the way, it wasn't just 5 years. I think they've always studied it. But do you think that article was a form of official disclosure by the government?
I think my personal feeling is that they're leaking stuff very slowly to acclimate us to these facts. I think there's always going to be some level of doubt because we've been told all this time to doubt this stuff. I think that there's other black programs that are currently investigating this phenomenon. We just haven't heard of them yet or discovered them yet.
Okay, before I ask this other question, because I do not want to forget to do this, I want to remind or let our listeners know if they need to contact John or Stan Milford, the email you gave me for the general population. And this was also on the McMinnville UFO Festival slide that you all had regarding the email address. May I give that email address out that you had at the McMinnville UFO Festival conference?
Yes, you can give that out.
Okay, it's Paranormal Rangers, and I'll go over this again a few times, folks. It's Paranormal Rangers 86515 at gmail.com. So it's paranormal in the singular, not plural. Paranormal Rangers, which is plural. So Paranormal Rangers 86515 at gmail.com. I wanted to know, I'm going to ask you a question that I asked Dr. Michael Paul Masters, who's a professor regarding anthropology. And he wrote a book called, I think it's IFOs, and it has a very long title, but it's, he believes a hypothesis that ETs are us from the future. But anyway, what I had asked him is, if you came across ETs who were abducting people in the forest, and you had all of your hunter gear or your officer gear on you, meaning guns on you, what would be your first reaction? What would you do if you saw them abducting people?
Boy, that's a tough one. As a law enforcement officer, you're there to protect life and property. And the phenomenon itself, doesn't necessarily preclude that you're in danger of death, because it seems like everybody's being abducted and returned. However, that being said, you would try to, I think I would try to intervene somehow. Maybe not with a firearm, because shooting might not be the best thing to do. But try to at least distract or create a distraction that would allow some of those people to get away.
Yeah, I figure if they could be millions of years ahead in their technology, a gun's probably not going to, they probably anticipate things like that anyway from us humans, right?
That's right.
Okay. Well, I wanted to thank you very much for having been on our show today. Really am so grateful to have had the opportunity to interview you. And I wanted to ask you a question. We're going to have quite a few panels this year on the UFO topic, especially regarding military and law enforcement personnel. Would you please consider joining us again? You have in the past already, but will you please join us again this year for various panels on that topic?
Yeah, that would be pretty much a case-by-case basis, and it would depend. I do a lot of traveling, okay. And I'm usually in either New Mexico, or I could be in California, I could be up in San Francisco area, so, or even toward Kansas. Just depend on what I've got going on during that time.
Well,
John, thanks a lot. I sure do appreciate you coming on the show, and you got us off to a great start. So everybody, thanks again to John Dover for joining us. Thanks, Chant, and yeah, we'll be back. We've got more shows on the way. So thank you all very much. You have a great week. Bye bye now.